Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In the depths of a treacherous mountain, Amina and Kofi confront the overwhelming darkness of the abyss in a battle for their very souls. Emerging from a brief sanctuary, their resolve is tested as they navigate twisting passages leading to a vast cavern, where a swirling vortex of shadow threatens to consume them. Armed with a dwindling crystal, Amina must summon her courage and tap into ancient magic, even if it means sacrificing her own soul. As shadows close in and malevolent energy crackles in the air, the stakes escalate in a desperate attempt to thwart the abyss's relentless hunger. With their lives hanging in the balance, the duo faces a climactic confrontation that will determine not just their fates, but the fate of light itself in a world overshadowed by darkness. The warm light of the chamber faded as they left, plunging them back into the suffocating darkness of the mountain. But the peace they had felt in the sanctuary gave them the strength to push on, even as the air grew colder and the shadows seemed to close in around them. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the mountain, until finally, they emerged into a vast cavern, its walls covered in shimmering crystals that reflected a faint, eerie light. In the center of the cavern stood a massive, swirling vortex of darkness, a maelstrom of shadow and malevolent energy that pulsed with the power of the abyss. Amina and Kofi stared in awe and terror at the vortex, its sheer size and power overwhelming. The air around it crackled with energy, and the ground trembled as the vortex drew in everything around it, light, sound, even the very air itself. It was the heart of the abyss, the source of all the darkness they had faced. And it was alive. As they approached, the vortex seemed to sense their presence, its energy intensifying. The shadows around them thickened, coalescing into twisted, grotesque forms that slithered and crawled toward them, their eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. The air was filled with the sound of their hissing, a chorus of death that sent shivers down Amina's spine. Kofi drew his knife, his face set with determination. "We can't let it consume us," he said, his voice firm. "We have to destroy it, or it will consume everything." Amina nodded, but her mind was racing. How could they possibly destroy something so powerful, something that had existed for centuries, feeding on the souls of the damned? The crystal in her hand was their only hope, but its light was fading, its power nearly depleted. The shadows closed in, their forms shifting and writhing as they prepared to strike. Amina and Kofi stood back to back, ready to fight, but the odds were against them. The shadows were too many, too strong, and the vortex's pull was growing stronger with every passing second. Just as the shadows lunged, Amina felt a surge of energy from the crystal. It flared with a bright, blinding light, cutting through the darkness and driving the shadows back. The vortex roared in fury, its energy lashing out in a wave of dark power that slammed into them, knocking them to the ground. But the crystal's light held, forming a barrier around them, protecting them from the abyss's onslaught. Amina struggled to her feet, the crystal glowing brightly in her hand. She could feel its power, a connection to the light that had once existed before the abyss had consumed it. With a shout, she raised the crystal high, its light focusing into a single, concentrated beam that pierced the vortex. The darkness roiled and screamed, the vortex thrashing violently as the beam of light cut through its core. The very air seemed to vibrate with the force of the abyss's agony, the primal roar that reverberated through the cavern, shaking the ground beneath Amina and Kofi's feet. But the vortex was far from defeated. With a sudden surge of energy, it pushed back against the light, its shadowy tendrils wrapping around the beam, trying to snuff it out. The crystal in Amina's hand flickered, its light faltering under the immense pressure. She gritted her teeth, pouring every ounce of her will into the crystal, but she could feel the strain, the darkness threatening to overwhelm her. Kofi, seeing her struggle, lunged forward with his knife, aiming for the nearest shadowy form. His blade cut through the darkness, but the shadow reformed instantly, laughing with a twisted, guttural sound that sent chills down his spine. He slashed again, but it was like fighting smoke. The shadows were everywhere, closing in from all sides, their hissing voices filling his ears. "Amina," he shouted, desperate. "We need more power. It's not enough." Amina knew he was right. The light was weakening, the darkness closing in around them. She could feel the abyss's hunger, a ravenous void that sought to consume everything, to drag them down into eternal darkness. The crystal's energy was nearly spent, and once it failed, there would be nothing to stop the abyss from swallowing them whole. Desperation clawed at her mind, but amidst the chaos, the thought came to her, one last, desperate gambit. The crystal wasn't just a source of light, it was a conduit, a link to the ancient magic that had once held the abyss at bay. If she could tap into that magic, draw on its power. But it would require a sacrifice. Amina's heart pounded as she realized what she had to do. The crystal needed more energy, more than she could provide on her own. But there was one other source of power in the cavern, one that had been growing stronger, feeding on the fear and despair of the abyss. Her own soul. Kofi's voice snapped her back to the present, the shadows nearly upon them. "Amina, whatever you're going to do, do it now." Taking a deep breath, Amina closed her eyes, focusing on the crystal's light, on the connection she felt to the ancient magic. Slowly, she reached out with her mind, not to the light, but to the darkness, to the abyss itself. She could feel its power, a cold, alien presence, vast and incomprehensible. It was a force of destruction, of death and despair, but it was also a part of her now, a part of the world. And she would turn it against itself. With a cry, Amina let the abyss's power flow into the crystal, mingling with the light. The crystal flared, the combined energies clashing violently, but she held on, forcing them to merge. The pain was excruciating, as if her very soul was being torn apart, but she didn't let go. The crystal pulsed, growing brighter and brighter until it was a blinding white-hot beacon. The shadows screamed in unison, recoiling from the light, but the vortex fought back, lashing out with a final burst of dark energy. The cavern shook, the walls cracking as the forces collided, but Amina held firm, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Now," she shouted, her voice echoing through the cavern. Kofi didn't hesitate. He grabbed the crystal from her hand and hurled it directly into the vortex's center. The moment the crystal touched the vortex, there was an explosion of light and dark, the two forces staring at each other in a furious battle for dominance. The cavern was filled with a deafening roar, the air crackling with energy as the vortex twisted and writhed, trying to consume the light. For a moment, it seemed the darkness would win. The vortex swelled, growing larger, its tendrils reaching out to engulf them. But then, with a final, shuddering convulsion, the vortex imploded, collapsing in on itself with a thunderous boom. A blinding flash of light filled the cavern, and then a silence. Amina and Kofi were thrown to the ground, the force of the explosion knocking the wind out of them. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the silence oppressive, the only sound the faint crackling of dying energy. Slowly, Amina pushed herself up, her head spinning. The cavern was different now, the oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by a soft, almost serene glow. The crystals on the walls had regained their luster, casting gentle, warm light across the space. The shadows were gone, and the air was calm, the malevolent presence of the abyss nowhere to be felt. Kofi groaned as he sat up, rubbing his head. Did we do it?" Amina nodded, though she could barely believe it herself. "The vortex, it's gone. But even as she said the words, the sense of unease crept over her. The abyssal power she had tapped into, the darkness that had flowed through her, it was still there, lingering at the edge of her consciousness, waiting. She had defeated the vortex, but the cost had been great. The darkness was a part of her now, and she could feel its cold, insidious presence that would never fully leave. Kofi helped her to her feet, his eyes scanning the cavern warily. "We need to get out of here. Before anything else happens." Amina nodded again, though her mind was elsewhere. They had won, for now. But the abyss was vast, and its power was not so easily contained. She could feel it, pulsing in the back of her mind, a reminder that the darkness was still out there, waiting for its chance to return. They began to make their way out of the cavern, the path before them illuminated by the soft glow of the crystals. But Amina knew their journey was far from over. The abyss had been defeated, but it was not destroyed. It had merely retreated, waiting for the next time it could strike. And when that time came, they would need to be ready. The journey back through the mountain was eerily quiet, the oppressive weight of the abyss no longer pressing down on them, but Amina could not shake the sense of foreboding that hung over them like a dark cloud. The air was cold and still, the only sound the faint echo of their footsteps as they navigated the winding passages. As they reached the entrance to the mountain, the first rays of dawn began to pierce the horizon, bathing the world outside in a soft, golden light. It should have been a comforting sight, but to Amina, it felt like a lie, a beautiful veneer hiding the darkness that still lurked beneath. Kofi paused at the threshold, his eyes scanning the landscape below. The village was still there, untouched by the events that had transpired within the mountain. But it felt different now, as if a shadow had passed over it, leaving a stain that could never be washed away. "We should go," Kofi said quietly, but Amina could hear the uncertainty in his voice. She hesitated, her hand resting on the stone wall of the mountain. The crystal was gone, but its power still lingered within her, a small, flickering light amidst the encroaching darkness. She had won this battle, but she knew it was only the beginning. The abyss would not rest until it had claimed her soul, and the next time, she might not be so lucky. As they descended the mountain, Amina's mind was a whirl of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The villagers would never know the true extent of the danger they had faced, nor would they understand the burden that now rested on her shoulders. To them, she would be a hero, the one who had banished the darkness. But she knew the truth. The darkness had not been banished. It had merely been postponed. When they reached the village, they were met with cheers and cries of relief. The villagers rushed to meet them, their faces alight with gratitude and admiration. But as Amina looked into their eyes, she saw only shadows, shadows of the abyss that had seeped into her very being, shadows that would never fully leave. She smiled and accepted their thanks, but her heart was heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The darkness was still out there, and it was only a matter of time before it returned. And when it did, she would be the one to face it. But for now, she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the here and now. The battle was over, and they had won. There would be time to worry about the future later. For now, she would enjoy the light. But even as she tried to focus on the present, she could feel the darkness stirring in the back of her mind, a cold, insidious presence that whispered of things to come. The abyss was patient, and it would not be denied. And when it came for her, she would be ready. Days passed, and the village returned to a semblance of normalcy. The villagers went about their daily lives, grateful for the peace that had been restored, yet unaware of the darkness that still lurked in the shadows. Amina, however, could not escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The nightmares began almost immediately after their return. Each night, Amina found herself plunged into a world of shadows, where the abyss called to her with a voice that was both seductive and terrifying. She would awaken drenched in sweat, the whispers of the darkness still echoing in her ears. The dreams were so vivid, so real, that she began to dread falling asleep, knowing that the abyss was waiting for her in the depths of her mind. But it wasn't just the nightmares that troubled her. Strange things began to happen in the village. Cattle would go missing, only to be found later, their bodies drained of life, their eyes wide with terror. Children would wander too close to the forest, and return with vacant expressions, as if they had seen something that had shattered their innocence. The air grew thick with unease, and the villagers whispered of curses and bad omens. Amina knew these were not mere superstitions. The abyss was reaching out, testing the boundaries of its confinement, trying to find a way back into the world. The thought filled her with a cold dread, but she could not allow herself to be consumed by fear. She had to find a way to stop the darkness before it was too late. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows began to lengthen, Amina decided to seek out Nana, the village elder, for guidance. Nana had always been a source of wisdom and strength, her knowledge of the old ways unparalleled. If anyone could help Amina understand the nature of the abyss and how to combat it, it was her. Amina found Nana sitting by the fire in her hut, her weathered face bathed in the flickering light. The old woman looked up as Amina entered, her sharp eyes narrowing as she took in the younger woman's troubled expression. "You have seen it, haven't you?" Nana's voice was low and knowing, as if she had already guessed what Amina was about to say. Amina nodded, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "The abyss, it's not gone. It's still out there, reaching out to me, to the village. I can feel it." Nana sighed, her expression grave. "The abyss is an ancient force, older than this world, older than time itself. It cannot be destroyed, only contained. You have weakened it, but it is not defeated. And now, it knows you." The words sent a chill through Amina. "What do you mean, it knows me?" Nana's eyes met hers, dark and serious. "The abyss is not just a place, it is a consciousness, a being of pure darkness. When you drew on its power, you connected with it, and now it has marked you. It will seek you out, trying to reclaim what you took from it." Amina's heart pounded in her chest. How do I stop it? How do I fight something like that? Nana's gaze was steady, but there was a sadness in her eyes. There is no simple answer. The abyss is relentless, and it will not stop until it has consumed everything. But you are not powerless. The crystal you used, the light you called upon, it is part of the ancient magic that once held the abyss at bay. You must find a way to strengthen that magic, to bolster the defenses of the village. Amina felt a glimmer of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by doubt. "But the crystal is gone. I used it up in the battle." Nana shook her head. "The crystal was only a vessel, a tool. The true power lies within you, within the land itself. You must find a way to tap into that power again, to harness it and use it against the abyss." Amina clenched her fists, determination hardening in her chest. "I will do whatever it takes. I won't let the darkness win." Nana's expression softened, and she reached out to place a hand on Amina's arm. "You have a strong spirit, child. But remember, the abyss is cunning. It will try to deceive you, to turn your own fears and doubts against you. You must stay strong, then trust in the light." Amina nodded, though the weight of the task before her felt overwhelming. She thanked Nana and left the hut, stepping out into the cool night air. The village was quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. But Amina knew that the peace was fragile, that the darkness was lurking just beyond the edge of the light, awaiting for its chance to strike. As she walked through the village, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the sensation persisted, a prickling on the back of her neck that made her quicken her pace. When she reached her home, she paused at the door, her hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, she hesitated, a sense of dread washing over her. But she forced herself to push it aside and stepped inside. The interior was dark and silent, the familiar surroundings doing little to ease her anxiety. She moved to light a candle, but before she could strike the match, she heard a sound, a faint whisper, like the rustling of leaves, coming from the far corner of the room. Amina froze, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, she turned to face the source of the sound, her heart pounding in her ears. There, in the shadows, she could just make out a figure, its outline barely visible in the darkness. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure didn't move, but the whisper grew louder, more insistent. It was a voice she recognized, a voice that sent ice through her veins. It was the voice of the abyss. "Come to me, Amina," it whispered, the words wrapping around her like tendrils of smoke. "Come to me, and embrace the darkness." Amina backed away, her hand fumbling for the door. But before she could reach it, the figure lunged at her, its shadowy form engulfing her in a wave of cold, suffocating darkness. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the void, the world around her dissolving into blackness. The last thing she heard was the abyss's voice, cold and mocking. "You cannot escape me, Amina. You are mine." Amina awoke with a start, her body drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. She was in her bed, the familiar surroundings of her room slowly coming into focus. But the terror of the encounter lingered, the memory of the abyss's voice still echoing in her mind. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a nightmare, but the cold, hollow feeling in her chest told her otherwise. The abyss was growing stronger, its influence seeping into the real world. It was no longer content to wait in the shadows, it was coming for her, and it would not stop until it had claimed her soul. Amina sat up, rubbing her temples as she tried to make sense of what had happened. She had to do something, had to find a way to fight back before it was too late. But where could she turn? The crystal was gone, and Nana's words echoed in her mind, "The true power lies within you." But how was she supposed to harness that power? How could she fight a force as ancient and malevolent as the abyss? The answer came to her in a flash of clarity. The abyss was a force of darkness, but it was also a part of the world, just as light was. To defeat it, she would need to understand it, to delve into its secrets and find its weaknesses. But that would mean embracing the darkness, stepping into the abyss itself. The thought terrified her, but she knew it was the only way. The abyss had marked her, had claimed a part of her soul. But that connection went both ways. If she could learn to control it, to turn the abyss's power against itself, she might have a chance of defeating it once and for all. But it would be a dangerous path, one that could easily consume her if she wasn't careful. Amina rose from her bed, her mind made up. She would seek out the abyss, confront it head-on. But she wouldn't do it alone. She would need help, allies who could stand with her against the darkness. Her thoughts turned to Kofi. He had been with her through it all, had faced the abyss's horrors and come out the other side. He would understand, would know what needed to be done. With renewed determination, Amina dressed and left her home, heading for Kofi's hut. The village was quiet in the early morning light, the air crisp and cool. But there was a tension in the air, a sense of impending doom that hung over everything like a dark cloud. When she reached Kofi's hut, she found him already awake, sitting by the fire with a troubled expression. He looked up as she entered, his eyes dark with worry. "Amina," he said, his voice low. "I've been having strange dreams, nightmares. The abyss, it's trying to reach me." Amina nodded, sitting down beside him. "It's not just dreams. The abyss is getting stronger." Kofi's eyes widened at Amina's revelation, his breath catching in his throat. He had known something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. The abyss was not just a distant threat, it was here, in their village, and it was growing stronger by the day. "What do we do, Amina?" Kofi asked, his voice a mix of fear and determination. "How do we fight something like that?" Amina took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. We have to understand it, Kofi. The abyss is a part of the world just as light is. To defeat it, we need to learn its secrets, find its weaknesses. And to do that, we have to confront it head-on. Kofi stared at her, his mind racing. You mean, you want to go back into the abyss? Amina nodded, her resolve hardening. I don't think we have a choice. The abyss is coming for us, Kofi. If we don't stop it now, it will consume everything, our village, our people, our world. We have to take the fight to it, before it's too late. Kofi swallowed hard, the enormity of the task before them sinking in. But he knew Amina was right. They couldn't just wait for the darkness to engulf them, they had to act, and they had to act now. How do we do it? He asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. How do we confront the abyss? Amina's eyes darkened as she thought about the question. Nana said the true power lies within us, within the land. The crystal was only a tool, a vessel for that power. We need to find a way to tap into that power again, to use it to strengthen ourselves before we enter the abyss. Kofi nodded, but the doubt was still there, lingering at the edge of his thoughts. But what if the abyss is too strong? What if we get lost in it, like before? Amina reached out, placing a hand on his arm. We won't be alone this time, Kofi. We'll have each other, and we'll have the light. We just need to trust in that. The words brought a measure of comfort to Kofi, but the fear still gnawed at him. They were about to embark on a journey into the heart of darkness, into a place where few had ventured and even fewer had returned. But he knew he couldn't back down, not now. Amina needed him, and the village was depending on them both. We'll need supplies, Kofi said, standing up. And we should talk to Nana again. Maybe she can give us something to help, something to protect us. Amina agreed, and together they left the hut, the morning light doing little to dispel the shadows that seemed to cling to them. As they walked through the village, they couldn't help but notice how quiet everything was. The usual sounds of daily life were muted, as if the village itself was holding its breath, awaiting for something terrible to happen. They reached Nana's hut and found the old woman sitting outside, her eyes closed as she murmured a prayer to the spirits. When she opened her eyes and saw them, she gave a small nod, as if she had been expecting them. You've made your decision, then, Nana said, her voice calm but tinged with sadness. Amina nodded. We are going to the abyss. We have to find a way to stop it before it's too late. Nana sighed, her gaze distant. It is a dangerous path you've chosen, but it is the only one left to you. The abyss will not rest until it has consumed everything. But remember, Amina, Kofi, the darkness is not just in the abyss. It is in all of us. You must be careful not to let it take root in your heart, or you will be lost. Kofi shivered at her words, but Amina remained resolute. We'll be careful, Nana. But we need your help. Is there anything you can give us, something to protect us or guide us when we are in the abyss? Nana thought for a moment, then rose and went inside her hut. When she returned, she was holding two small pouches, each tied with a piece of twine. These are talismans, she explained, handing one to each of them. They are made from the herbs and stones of the earth, infused with the power of the spirits. They will not defeat the abyss, but they will offer you some protection from its influence. Keep them close, and remember to trust in the light. Amina and Kofi took the talismans, feeling the weight of the responsibility they carried. They thanked Nana, and after a brief farewell, they left the village, heading toward the edge of the forest where the entrance to the abyss lay hidden. As they walked, the shadows seemed to grow longer, the air colder. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, as if it too was aware of the danger that lay within. But Amina and Kofi pressed on, their determination unwavering. When they reached the entrance to the abyss, they paused, standing at the threshold of the dark, gaping maw that led into the unknown. Amina could feel the pull of the abyss, like a cold hand reaching out to drag her down into the depths. But she resisted, clutching the talisman Nana had given her. She turned to Kofi, who nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "Ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kofi swallowed, then nodded again. "Ready." Together, they stepped into the abyss, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air grew thick and oppressive, the silence deafening. But they kept moving forward, guided by the faint glow of the talismans in their hands. The deeper they went, the stronger the presence of the abyss became. The shadows twisted and writhed around them, whispering dark thoughts and fears, trying to break their resolve. But Amina and Kofi held firm, their bond and the light of the talismans keeping them grounded. Finally, they reached the heart of the abyss, a vast, empty void that stretched out before them, pulsing with a malevolent energy. In the center of the void stood a figure, its form shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. Amina's breath caught in her throat as she realized who it was. The figure was a twisted reflection of herself, the abyss's manifestation of the darkness within her. The figure smiled, a cruel, mocking grin. "Welcome, Amina. I've been waiting for you." Amina and Kofi make a decision to return to the abyss. Will darkness swallowing them whole, or will they survive? Join us on the final episode to find out.